I have here a recent Washington Post article. The title is, "In States with Laws Targeting LGBTQ Issues, School Hate Crimes Have Quadrupled." School hate crimes targeting LGBTQ people have sharply risen in recent years, climbing the fastest in states that have passed laws restricting LGBT student rights and education, an analysis of FBI data finds. In states with restrictive laws, the number of hate crimes on K-12 campuses has more than quadrupled since an onset of divisive culture wars that is often centered on the rights of LGBTQ youth. And at the same time, calls to LGBT youth crisis hotlines have exploded. So that's the real harm that we're doing with this piece of legislation. There's a real consequence. And lastly, this bill started off as a bill that everyone could support related to mental health for athletes. And it was sad to see some of the advocates watch this bill get destroyed by adding these other 4 or 5 bills. How upset they were that the Senate chose to do this with a good measure that they felt really advance the cause of helping our children cope with mental health issues. So I do want to point that out as well. So basically, it's a amalgamation of a whole number of wrong-headed culture war bills that I don't think that this body should put forward. So I'll be voting no, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
You do have a couple questions. Recognize the senator from 36.
Thank you, Mr. President. Does Senator yield?
Certainly, to my friend from Fulton.
Senator, could you elaborate a bit on this question that you touched on early on, and that is the long-standing rankings of our state in teen pregnancy and putting that alongside draconian laws against abortion. How is it that we think these young people are going to get through life, get through school, and make those hard and big decisions that face particularly young girls and young teens and young women, around how to keep themselves safe, how to keep themselves from untoward events happening to them, from being exploited? We hear a lot in this chamber, isn't it true, about exploitation and trafficking and that whole sort of thing, the incredible damage that's done to young people that are trafficked.
Yeah.
Is it your opinion that trying to silence solid sex education that has been vetted now for many decades, that trying to silence that and outlaw that for sixth grade, anybody that's not sixth grade or older, is just paving the way for young people to be exploited, trafficked, misused, pregnant. The list goes on and on. Can you kind of connect those dots for us in case it's not obvious enough?
Well, you make a good point, Senator from the 36th, and I should note that teen pregnancy rates have always been highest in the South. Across the country, it's always been the highest in the South, and tremendous progress has been made. We know that the outcomes of children born to teen mothers are not very good. They're not good. And it's also not good for that teen mother herself, because her ability to work, go to school, et cetera, is then more limited. And so that does have more risk of trapping you in a cycle of intergenerational poverty. So one of the reasons that it's always been much higher in the South is because of this, I suppose, well-intended but completely wrong-headed notion that by not talking about sex, you might somehow bury it and it won't happen or something. Well, that's just crazy. That's just crazy. And it's false. It's completely false. In fact, the opposite will be true. They will have information. It will just be bad information. It will be erroneous information. One of my friend's kids got told by a friend on the classroom, on the play yard, he was like, well, I know what sex is. Oh, really? What is it? It's when two people hug each other and jump up and down. And just stuff like that you're going to hear without their clothes on. Right? I mean, you're just going to, all this wild stuff, and kids won't know how to protect themselves. And that's what leads to unfortunate outcomes, which you laid out very, very well, about unwanted pregnancies, abuse, trafficking, having no idea what forms of birth control are available, having no idea how to say no to unwanted advances, or even that you have the power to say no to unwanted advances. So the risks are, it's a lot more than just sex and preventing teen pregnancy. It's actually about understanding your body, your rights, your autonomy, and paving and charting a future for, and choosing a future for yourself, for both boys and girls. But it is particularly important for girls, since they're the ones who can get pregnant and are more likely to be abused.
And one further question, if you will yield.
Sure.
So, isn't it accurate to say that this policy that was slapped together willy-nilly, as has been described, this mudball of bills that's been of issues of cultural war issues that have been thrown together, but that we will see outcomes exactly the opposite
100%
of
we
what
will.
the supporters of this say they want to see?
100%. Talk to your kids about sex, because if you don't, you can be assured everybody else is. Thank you.
You have one more question, Senator. Recognize Senator from the 27th.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's Chairman Yield.
Sure, of course.
Chairlady Yield, sorry.
Of course, of course.
I want to go to the lines 369 in the bill. And Senator, my question really is, why are you conflating youth sports with interscholastic sports, which is what this bill tries to deal with? You referenced you called it the skills advantage that does emerge in the 7th and 8th grade, I think becomes pretty pronounced as you get into high school and certainly enter adulthood. I'm going to assume that you and I agree on that based on what you said there. So given that, don't you think that it's reasonable that we do eliminate that skills advantage in middle school and high school?
So it all depends. I think, and we, I think, had a little bit of an exchange like this in committee. I appreciate what you're saying, your agreement or tacit agreement about my point about prepubescent youth sports. I welcome that. I think that there's a lot of evolving discussion happening around, for example, the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, the NCAA, they all have their organizing bodies that are well equipped to handle this question based on facts, science, and the reality of any situations in a way that I think makes them the appropriate body to make those decisions versus sort of political advantage bills.
Do you further yield?
Certainly.
So as it relates to high school sports in Georgia, you want us to outsource that decision-making ability to the International Olympic Commission?
No. I think we have our own organizations that are already dealing with this issue, right? We passed that bill a few years ago.
Do you further yield?
Sure.
I think my concern, Senator, is I'm hearing you conflate youth sports, which are not mentioned in this bill, with interscholastic sports, which are mentioned in this bill, while you simultaneously admit the reality that there is a competitive advantage that emerges in middle school.
There might be.
And my concern, which gets to my next question, isn't it true, Senator, that the real concern has nothing to do with youth sports, that if we were to amend this bill and made it very clear that this did not have anything to do with elementary age sports, that you, members of your party, would still oppose this because at the core, you're not opposed to biological males competing against biological females, even in high school sports?
I disagree with the premise of your question.
Do you further yield?
Yes.
What's the premise that you disagree with?
Your blanket statement about me, my party, and everyone in this chamber, and your views on what we would do on a question not in front of us.
Okay, then do you further yield?
Sure.
If I amend this bill to further clarify what I think is inherently in this bill, to make it clear that it does not include youth sports, but it only applies to middle school and high school sports, would you be agreeable to what this bill does, stating that that biological male must compete against biological males, and biological females must compete against biological females.
So we probably don't have as much time as it would take for me to answer this. A, I don't agree with you about middle school. B, I already explained that I think we're not the appropriate body to be making these calls, and that there are organizations that have been set up in law by us and the House and everybody else that are far better equipped and are the appropriate people to consider these complicated questions. And thirdly, the part that I think would take a long time and we don't have time for right now is a lot about what exactly is the purpose of high school sports, right? Now, I agree that in rare instances in high school sports, you are getting into a space where you may be looking for a collegiate scholarship, or you may be an elite athlete. I think there's a big difference between elite athletics in any form and general youth sports to include high school. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you for answering my question, Senator.
Thank you for asking. I yield the well.
Yeah, no further questions, Senator. Okay, so we've got Senator from the 2nd, followed by the 6th, and then the Senator from the 14th will have the minority report. So recognize the Senator from the 2nd to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I've got a couple concerns about the nature of this bill and how I read it. A couple weeks ago, we heard that for the need for SB 233 to pass, that we had failing schools, and the school districts were terrible, the schools were terrible, and parents needed educational freedom. That's what we heard. And as I flipped through the bill, and I wanted to just understand who was included in this bill, in Section 1, it talked about each local board of education. It talked about other public school governing bodies shall establish policies and procedures of students enrolled at the time, talking about the library. But I noticed this code section didn't address private schools. And then I thought, well, maybe you can't address private schools in this legislation. So here we have public schools, public school mandates for public schools. But I thought, well, certainly, maybe we can mandate private schools, because I was told that you can't do that. But then last week I said that, and then you said you can't do that. And then I decided to go and read this bill a little longer, and I brought my reading glasses, Mr. President, just in case my eyes fail me. And so as I flipped through the bill again, I got to Section 1-2, and then I saw that it said on line 60, talked about public schools, public school materials being available, public schools again, and only public schools mentioned in this code section. Only public schools that have to follow these rules that relates to libraries. I thought about, what about the private schools? What about the for-profit schools? What about the schools that we had to pass the educational freedom? What about the SB 233 schools? Should they not have any accountability? I thought, well, maybe that's not the case. But I got to Section 3-2 in the bill. And then I found on lines 205, when it came to talking about trans kids participating in sports, we could mention private schools then. It says on line 205, multiple occupancy restroom changing area means they're in a local school system, public school system, or participating private school building that is designed and designated to be used by one or more individuals at the same time, in which one or more individuals may be in the various stages of undress in the presence of other individuals. And it had mention of those schools. But I thought we couldn't talk about mandates for private schools. But we can if it's mutually agreed upon. But then I kept going through the bill, and I found on line 372, it says no local school system, public school, or private participating private school in this state shall operate interscholastic athletics that permit a person whose sex is male to use any multiple occupancy restroom. I said, man, my, what a tangle web we weave when we weave one to deceive. So you got some rules in here about private schools when it comes down to transgender children participating, but when it comes down to the accountability of those same public school children that will leave and go to private schools, you don't have no mandates for what those librarians do. You don't have any mandates for what happens at those schools. You don't have any mandates about those parents getting notifications for all of the library books that those children take books out. So why not be consistent in what you're doing? My grandmother used to tell me what's good for the goose is good for the gander. So again, colleagues, if you say that this is true and you believe it 200%, why don't you put the burden on the private schools as well? Let them follow all of the rules that you got for the public schools. But here it is, a double standard, a separate group. And colleagues, I'm telling you right now, if you're going to do something, if you do anything, just be consistent in what you do. If you're going to be about principle, because one thing about me, Mr. President, the center from the second, I'll die on principle. And I'm a down principle on this. If you're going to do something for one, do it for everybody. Be consistent in how you legislate. Don't pull folks out for certain things and not for everything, because you just told me last week schools were failing. Can't count on local school districts to do the right thing, but you can count on private schools to do the right thing for everything? Oh, no. Well, we trust them on everything but this one thing. But we'll let them go on everything else. Be consistent and true to what you said on paper. Be true to what you said in 233. Make it follow. Make it mirror. You knew that this was coming. This should be consistent with everything else we've done, but it's not, because when it says local school system, that means another mandate for another local school system. Doesn't mandate anything for a private school. Doesn't mandate anything for a for-profit school. They're on the way. You got to voucher with 6,500 because we need educational freedom. But freedom is only applied if you leave a public school and go to a private school. That's where freedom exists. But again, you got rules for these public schools because there's not freedom in public schools. But if you do go to a private school and you do need educational freedom, then you got it, because the bill's not there. The language is not there. It's only on certain parts. It's not consistent throughout the rest of the statute. And it says local school system, local district. When you want to talk about private schools, you put a comma and you say private schools. But that's not consistent throughout this bill, because the intent is not to apply to them. So rules for some, not rules for all. Rules for thee, but not for me. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the well.
The senator has yielded. All right, so we're upon us now for the, unless any other senator has anything, we're going to let the senator from the 14th give the minority report. Recognize the senator from the 14th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, given that I'm speaking to maybe not even a quorum of the Senate, and given the beautiful presentation for the senator from the 34th this morning, I thought it was an amazing tribute that she deserves every bit of. I have decided, my dear colleagues, in the room and those mowing down on donuts in the A&T room who can hear me on the TV 1 second late, I have decided to dedicate this speech to the senator from the 34th. And I'm going to pick a theme that I think resonates with all of us, because we have heard her say the theme so many times. You know the stage. Let me set it for you. We're about to adjourn. The Senate has this little game we like to play. House does it too, where there's a motion to adjourn by the majority leader, and then maybe 2 people say aye, and everybody else says no really loudly, but the chair says the ayes clearly have it, right? What does the senator from the 34th say every time when the noes shout? She goes, aye, and then the noes go, no, and then the senator from the 34th shouts, weak. And that's what this bill is. It is weak. Let's go through real quick, because my colleagues have covered the nuts and bolts. Let's just sum it up, because that's what a minority report is for. Banning sex education before 6th grade. Weak. The reason is because kids by the age of 7, maybe even earlier, are already dealing with the threat of abuse, gender identity forming, real-world interactions on the playground like the senator from the 42nd talked about. So the train is moving, but the parents might be lagging behind. What is this bill? It is nothing more but banning everybody from talking about sex, so that a few parents who feel uncomfortable don't have to until later in life. Weak. The Mayo Clinic actually has standards on this. Pediatricians obtain consent from kids at the age of 5 to even touch them for a physical exam. They have to explain the concept of autonomy and consent to a small child. And there are reasons, there are good reasons why parents might delay the sexual health talk. This is from the Mayo Clinic website. Religious, familial, social, cultural traditions, badly handled sex ed by their parents, discomfort with imagining your child as a sexual being, all understanding. But to change all of Georgia state law because you have issues to work through in preparing your child for the real world is weak. And we should not be afraid to say that. There are two more parts of the bill that are problematic that we'll talk about, right? We've already discussed. Trans sports, players, and bathrooms. We'll start with bathrooms. Forcing kids to go into an uncomfortable setting and make other kids uncomfortable because you don't want to acknowledge that they're having the feelings that they're having at that age. Weak. And unintended consequences stem from this. Do you recognize that a bathroom bill forces a trans man, a male-presenting individual, to go into a women's bathroom? Just think about that. If you're afraid of trans identity, which a lot of the Republican base is, then you're forcing a person who looks like a man, because they are a man, to go to a women's restroom. Y'all say you're worried about predators. You say you're worried about optics. People feeling uncomfortable. You just jacked it up to 11. And then there's the sordid reality that a trans woman has to go to a male locker room where they're subject to, empirically, they're subject to a higher risk of harassment and physical assault because they're different. Let's also talk about studies which have been done on the 28 states that have passed laws like this that draw hard lines in the sand on gender identity and trans rights. In those states, the increase in violence against LGBTQ people has been greater than in the states that haven't passed these laws. And it's not that hard to figure out why. Because we here, wearing suits and ties and business attire, the people who are supposed to be mature and have it together, are codifying into law that these people are different, they are other, we have to be protected from them. So what do you think kids do in response to that? When their parents are saying it and their legislators are saying it. They go to school, they call kids queer, they say, go kill yourself already. This is documented. And they do it because they feel like we give them license to. So to change the law, to try to protect your own feelings about something that you have yet to understand is weak. Now, the last one is the most difficult one for Democrats. I'll acknowledge this. That's the trans sports issue. And the reason it's difficult is because the polling, there is some polling, if you poll the word fairness, or if you poll biological males in women's sports, there are poll numbers that suggest that a majority of people might want fairness in sports. That means an anti-trans bill. I've seen those polls. But let me tell you what polls even worse. What polls even worse is when the government decides to spend this much time passing a bill that targets a handful of kids in the entire state because they're different from us. What's even worse than a perceived lack of fairness in the polls is being a bully. And what do you learn about bullies from your parents growing up? Deep down, bullies who present as angry, violent, what are they actually? They're afraid. They are weak. Again, I want to stress that it's not wrong to not understand something. It's not wrong to think something's new and unfamiliar. It's not wrong to need guidance or to look for help or to go to therapy or to go through the development you need to go through to confront difficult realities about your kids or to learn about people who aren't like you. None of that's wrong. In fact, Democrats owe everybody an obligation to be understanding and receptive. When people come to us and say, hey, I heard what you said on the floor. I want to know a little bit more about it because I just don't think I've been exposed to all of the science and the things you're talking about. But that doesn't make it any less weak to change the entirety of the law to protect yourself from having to go through that process. People want to talk about snowflakes. People want to talk about what's soft in the last few years. The left is woke. Safe spaces. This bill creates the biggest safe space of them all. And that is a safe space for a fraction of the public that doesn't want to acknowledge the reality of trans people and LGBTQ people generally. And it says those people never have to confront the existence of those people and what it means. Instead, they can hide behind Georgia state law. And that, my friends, is weak. Thank you, Mr. President.
All right. Senator has closed debate. So recognize the senator from the 45th, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm shocked by the minority report and, you know, some of the rhetoric that was spewed from them up here at this well. Simply what this bill does is it protects children and it empowers parents. It allows parents to get information on books that their children check out from school. It also prevents sex ed from being taught before 6th grade. Children only have a finite amount of time of innocence, and we should be wanting to protect that. And I'm shocked by some of the comments that I heard from the well. And we're just, I don't know. And as far as dealing with any type of abuse or anything like that was also spoke from the Senator from the 42nd, there's a carve out for that. Teachers can talk to children about that before 6th grade, so it had nothing to do with that as well. And talking about girls and protecting the sanctity of their sports is something that women have fought for 50 years. And you're just going to claw that back? I mean, you've got a biological male. When someone's born a male, it's on their birth certificate. And as they start going through puberty, as we heard from the Senator from the 42nd, as well as puberty starting as early as in elementary school, for some children, our boys have a distinct advantage over females, and we need to protect that. And also, talking about the changing rooms, I mean, I'm a father of 3 and I've got 2 daughters. I won't say what I would be or what I would do if I knew there was a male changing in my daughter's restroom. I mean, there's a story, I went to an event with Riley Gaines, who's actually a college student, who was forced to change with a biological male, claiming that he was transgender. Of course, he did beat her just barely in a swimming meet at the college level, but then she was forced to change with him, and he was still a fully intact male. And hear her talk about how horrifying that was for her as a college student. And y'all think it's okay for kids that are in elementary, middle school, or high school to be exposed to that? I'm flabbergasted. But again, this bill simply empowers parents and protects kids. With that, Mr. President, I'll yield the well.
All right. Does any other senator wish to speak for or against the measure? Chair hears none. Is there objection to the previous question being ordered? Chair hears none. Previous question is ordered. Question is on the adoption of the committee substitute. Is there objection to the adoption of the committee substitute? Hearing none, the committee substitute is adopted. Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the committee which is favorable to the passage of the bill? Chair hears none. Report of the committee is agreed to. Is there objection to the main question being ordered? Chair hears none. The main question is ordered. Question is on the passage of the bill by substitute. All those in favor of the bill vote yea. Opposed, nay. Secretary will unlock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 33, the nays are 21. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed by substitute.